Amen. Okay, so tonight is Abimelech. We'll start with this just to remind you of how Judges works. This is the first class of matching judges. If you remember, the one chart that I gave you looked like an arrow where the pieces matched. This is just another way of showing that. And so here's the start of Judges in Othniel, Ehud, Deborah, and Barak. Gideon is split into two parts, and so we finished the second part of Gideon. And today we're moving into Gideon's son, Abimelech. And structurally, with the book of Judges, Abimelech matches the Deborah and Barak story. And so I'm curious, I did not ask this ahead of time. And so if you don't have anything off of the top of your mind ready to go for this, that would be perfectly understandable. But if you think about it, if you did some reading ahead and you read Abimelech's story, and you remember the story of Deborah and Barak, can you think of any connecting points between the two where Abimelech's story and Deborah and Barak's story kind of intersect, or what is in common, or what's contrasting between the two? Can you think of anything? Who's the hero in the Deborah Barak story? Did you raise your hand or just swipe your hair? No. Jael, remember Jael? Sisera ran into her tent, and this woman stabbed him in the head with a tent peg. And who's the hero in the Abimelech story? Whenever we get to the end of the story, if you read the text, it's an unnamed woman who drops a stone on Abimelech's head and kills him. Well, I guess she doesn't kill him, but hurts him bad enough that he says to someone else, "Kill me so this woman isn't the one who kills me." But she gets credit in my book anyway. And so there's at least one intersecting point. You have shameful death by woman. And, you know, that's just the way in the Deborah Barak story. Deborah said to Barak, "You are going to win this war, but the glory is not going to go to you. It's going to go to someone else." And that Jael got it. And so you have the shameful woman section of this. Barak, the story of Barak and Abimelech go together in this way, in that he is one who should have led against external enemies. Remember, Deborah had to prod him and say, "Come on, get up, let's go. Has not the Lord called you? Come on, let's go." And Barak's response to Deborah was, "Well, I'll do it if you go with me." So he should have led against external enemies and reluctantly did. Abimelech is a story of somebody who should not have led. And the enemies and the conflict in this story are all internal. This is a big family problem. God's people should have been fighting the people of the land and taking the land. This is a story about internal fighting within a family. Well, really, I mean, in a true sense, one big family. And so that way kind of goes together. In the Deborah story, in Judges chapter 4, there's the story of Deborah and Barak. Judges chapter 5 is a poem about that. And then in this story, there's also, it's a fable. It's not a poem, but it's a fable. It's a story about different trees. And so you have the poetry, the artistic, mixed in with the story. They're both in the north. That's kind of the obvious one. They're the only two judges in part of Israel. So yeah, does anybody know the Judges song, the kids song? Do you know it, Susan? You probably don't want to sing it for us because I don't know it. The only thing I know about the Judges song, is when you get to Abimelech, you can do this, right? Abimelech. That's not the one you know. Well, then I won't ask you to sing it for us then. The song that Jay... Do you know it? Yep. Do you want to sing it for us? Sure.
Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, and Gideon. Abimelech
But you didn't do the motion. Yes.
Oh, yeah, I didn't.
You didn't do, when you do Abimelech, you do this, right?
Shake your head no.
Because Abimelech is a no-go. Like, he's a bad guy. There's no question about this. That's the big thing about this one. I'm going to, in this class tonight, as we go through the story, there are probably other things to say about this, but the thing that I'm going to be tracing is this constant, almost in every single section of this story, disloyalty. There is constant disloyalty in this story. And remember whenever we did the first part of Gideon, how it was just doubt and fear, and doubt and fear, and doubt and fear. And you can't miss that that's the point of the story. You cannot miss that disloyalty is the main theme of this story. So, let's go ahead and start. The first one is probably not, just readily apparent. Chapter 8 and verses 29. We'll start a little bit early where Abimelech is introduced here. Would somebody read, please, Judges 8:29 through the end of Judges 8?
As soon as Gideon died, the people of Israel turned again and roared after the Baals and made Baal Berith their god. The people of Israel did not remember the Lord their God, who delivered them from the hand of all their enemies on every side. And they did not show steadfast love to the family of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, in return for all the good that he had done to Israel.
Okay. I wanted you to start in 29, which is fine. I'll read that one. That's okay. Jerubbaal, the son of Joash, went and lived in his own house. Now Gideon had 70 sons, his own offspring, for he had many wives. And his concubine, so one of his many wives, his concubine. When you think of a concubine, there's lots of different ways that people try and define what a concubine is. I think the simplest way to think about it is she has no right of inheritance, and neither do her kids. She's a wife who has no right as a wife of inheritance. So his concubine, who was in Shechem, also bore him a son, and he called his name Abimelech. Remember, Abimelech is a name that means my dad is the king. My father is the king. And Gideon, son of Joash, died in a good old age. He was buried in the tomb of Joash, his father. A couple things about this. Shechem. Do you know anything about Shechem? Anything pop into your head? From the verses up there, Genesis 12 and verse 6. When you see Genesis 12 in the early part, what do you think of? It's where God made his promise to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. And in Genesis 12 and verse 6, it says that Abraham went to Shechem, and in Shechem, this is the place where God said, see all this land? I'm going to give it to you. So I'm thinking with Shechem, this is the place of covenant. This is the place of where God says, me and you, Abraham, me and you and your people. In Joshua 24, this is where Joshua says, you can see it in verse 1, it says that he's in Shechem. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. That happened at Shechem. It's the renewal of the covenant where Joshua is saying to Israel, we're coming into the land. We're here. God is going to be our God. This is our covenant God. And so then, in verse 33, as soon as Gideon died, the people of Israel turned again and whored after the Baals and made Baal Berith their god. Berith is the Hebrew word that means covenant. And so this is Baal of the covenant. That's who they're serving and who they're worshiping. And so I think this one might have been helpful if we came to this point after this class and you see all the points we're going to make and then you see this and you're like, oh yeah, obviously this is the problem. But from the very start, what we see is that Israel was supposed to be involved in this monogamous covenant with God. one and only God, no other gods besides him. And we see that at Shechem, which is a place where we think about that covenant. And this story is talking about how Israel is now serving a Baal of the covenant. They're in an agreement with somebody else, not God. And so the story starts by pointing us towards Israel has been disloyal to God. The thing that keeps popping into my head with this text, with this story, is when we talk about disloyal, we're going to talk about stabbing in the back. Israel has stabbed God in the back. No thanks, we're not doing this. Anything you want to say about that one? We just roll through each of these sections and talk about where you see disloyalty. Do you want to see Israel, say anything about Israel and disloyalty with God? Alrighty then. Let's go into, I think you also see, and I got this one on the list. In verse 35, 835, they did not show steadfast love to the family of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, in return for all the good that he had done to Israel. I'm pretty hard on Gideon. But he led the Israelites in victory against the Midianites. And he led to God's rest in the land for a time. And this story is starting by saying we're not faithful to God and we're not faithful to Gideon or anything that Gideon has done for us. It's not good. Okay, I'm going to ask somebody else to read then. And as soon as we're done with this, would you read verses 1 through 6? And when we're done with this, I want to ask where you see disloyalty in these 6 verses, if you see the theme here. Go ahead, please.
Now Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, went to Shechem to his mother's relatives and said to them, and to the whole clan of his mother's family, say in the ears of all the leaders of Shechem, which is better for you, that all 70 of the sons of Jerubbaal rule over you, or they one rule over you. Remember also that I am your bone and your flesh. And his mother's relatives spoke all these words on his behalf in the ears of all the leaders of Shechem. And their hearts inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, he is our brother. And they gave him 70 pieces of silver out of the house of Baal-berith, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless fellows who followed him. And he went into his father's house at Ophrah and killed his brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal, 70 men on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left. For he said to himself, and all the leaders of Shechem came together, and all birthed Millo, and they went and made Abimelech king by the oak of the pillar of Shechem.
Okay. Where do you see disloyalty? I guess I'm kind of leading you into a place. If you have any other comments that you want to make about that text, you can do that too. It doesn't have to just be about disloyalty, but I'm specifically interested in this. Where do you see the disloyalty theme here?
Killing your brothers.
Who?
Killing your brothers.
Yeah, that's kind of a big deal. So Gideon has had 7 sons, 70 sons, and one of the women that he had Abimelech with is a Shechemite. And so Abimelech leans towards her and her family at Shechem and says, if I'm going to have a chance of being anything, we got to get rid of these other sons of Gideon. So, I mean, that's just the biggest and most obvious one. And you'll remember with the whole story of Judges, I mean, the subtitle for this class is The Failure of Male Leadership and the Fall of the Family in the book of Judges. Here is why it becomes a major theme and what this is a picture of. Abimelech murders his own family for selfish gain. To promote himself, he murders his own family, a lot of family too. So there's one piece of disloyalty. Yeah, Ryan?
In verse 4, whenever he's given the pieces of silver, that's from the house of that new Baal. So instead of tearing down that altar, here saying we're not doing that, he's actually profiting from that enterprise, which is just abruptly against God.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting to say, okay, Abimelech is doing this atrocious crime against his family. And who is supporting it and paying for it? Baal of the covenant is paying for this job to be done. And there's probably some point to be made here too. I don't know, exactly what the point is, but it says that they paid him 70 pieces of silver. So a piece of silver per son of Gideon. That's not a very expensive price to kill someone. This is cheap life paid for by Baal of the covenant, not God. Family disloyalty. Who else is involved in this crime?
All of his mother's brothers, they obviously knew what the plan was. They
Yeah.
paid around the temple. So
Yeah.
they're disloyal against the house of Gideon.
Yeah. So more family drama. Not trauma. I guess it is trauma, but drama is what I'm thinking of. In verse 1, Abimelech the son of Jerubbaal went to Shechem to his mother's relatives and said to them and to the whole clan of his mother's family, so family, he's talking to his family, and it's these people, this family, who instigates this eventual atrocity. Who else is involved? Who does Abimelech's family instigate to get us to this horrible point? That's another one. The worthless men are the guys who do it. But there's somebody else here. This is what the family says in verse 2. Say in the ears of all the leaders of Shechem, which is better for you. So, we've got, what do we have here? We've got Abimelech. We've got Abimelech's family. We've got Abimelech's family instigating the leaders of Shechem, who eventually appoint Abimelech as king. We've got Baal of the covenant paying for this thing, and we're paying worthless and reckless men to do it. This is treason. This is disloyalty across the board. Family disloyalty. When you think about what Israel's supposed to be doing right now, they're supposed to be fighting the Canaanites and the people in the land to take the land. All this is inside the family where this is happening. This is not our enemies. This is in the family. This is not okay.
What about them making him a king when Israel isn't supposed to have kings yet? They haven't even been God for a king. They're still under, the judges and the rulers like Moses, and they're not under a kingship yet, but they just went ahead and jumped the gun.
Yeah. I can't help but remember 8:23, what Gideon said. They said, rule over us, you and your son and your grandson, for you've saved us from the hand of Midian. And Gideon said, I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. The Lord will rule over you. But then he went on to act like a king. And guess who learned that behavior and took it too far? His son. Yeah, so good catch there, Michael. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to throw this one up here. Abimelech's family disloyalty. The city and the leaders of Shechem, where Abimelech's family, they participate in this disloyalty against Israel. The worthless and the reckless fellows, they're involved in all of this. Anything you want to say about this section? It's bad. There's nothing, I can't think of anything good to say about this. It's all bad. And that's a lot of the point. Okay, so this is one great thing about the book of Judges. It is so, this is one great thing about God. It's not just an instructive book about our soul. He is a really good author, and it's interesting to read. How did Abimelech and the worthless men eventually kill all of his 70 sons? What's said about that? Remember where they killed them all? On one stone. How does Abimelech eventually die? Woman drops a rock on his head. Same thing with Samson. Samson says, "Get her for me, for she looks good to me." The end of the story, he gets his eyes poked out. And this stuff is, this is just God being God, and it's awesome. I got a side note here that is not connected to family disloyalty or Israel disloyalty or the lesson, but one that has to do with all things relational. And I'm thinking politics, I'm thinking national, local, I'm thinking politics, I'm thinking church interaction and how we relate to one another as a church family. I'm thinking friendships and what happens with people in friendships. Abimelech accomplished what he accomplished in verse 2. He said, "Say in the ears of all the leaders of Shechem." And there's something like that comes later on in the story. Chapter 9 and verse 31, the same kind of thing happens to Abimelech. It said he sent messengers to Abimelech secretly, saying, "Behold, Gel the son of Ebed has relatives. They've come to Shechem and they're stirring up the city against you." And so, can we just, this is a point. Maybe you want to say something about it and this is fine. Sneaking and slithering around like a snake is never okay. You know what I'm saying? If the only way you can get your goal accomplished is by sneaking around and whispering in people's ear and hiding in the dark, there's a reason why God describes this as walking in darkness as opposed to walking in the light. And Jesus says over and over again things like, "I am the light, and every intent of our heart will be exposed." It's just a terrible way of being. I say this to kids all the time. If they have a friend, I know that I'm going way down a rabbit trail, but this is something that Abimelech teaches us here with this. If they have a friend, I'll say sometimes to Luke, "I don't like that guy." And he says, "Why? What did he do?" And I say, "He's sneaky." "What are you talking about?" I get the impression that he's sneaky. And I can't trust somebody who sneaks and slithers and hides and operates secretly in the dark. Nothing good is ever going to come from people who behave this way. Period. If you can't say it out loud, then maybe you just shouldn't say it at all. Anything you want to say about that point? Side note, total side note. Okay, sorry. I got distracted with that. Next one, Jotham's fable. Would somebody read Jotham's fable verses 7 through 15?
Trees came out to anoint a king over them, and they said to the olive tree, "Reign over us." But the olive tree said to them, "Shall I leave my abundance, by which gods and men are honored, and go hold sway over the trees?" And the tree said to the fig tree, "You come and reign over us." But the fig tree said to them, "Shall I leave my sweetness and my good fruit, and go hold sway over the trees?" And the tree said to the vine, "You come and reign over us." But the vine said to them, "Shall I leave my wine that cheers God and men, and go hold sway over the trees?" Then all the trees said to the bramble, "You come and reign over us." And the bramble said to the trees, "If in good faith you are anointing me king over you, then come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedar's blood."
Okay, thanks, Ryan. Somebody want to interpret the fable? Aren't you glad you read now? You're off the hook from this part. What's the point of the fable? Adam?
I'll take a stab at it. It seems like he's saying you ought to be skeptical of anybody who's eager to make themselves a ruler because they don't really have their own business to be taken care of, and it's kind of like the losers who are eager to sort of elevate to that position of power instead of people who kind of are successful and doing their own thing.
Yeah. Yeah. The trees say, who's going to rule over us? And the three mighty plants in Israel. You've got the olive, the fig, and the grapevine. And they say, no, we're too busy doing important things that serve everybody else and do good for the world around us. And so there's nobody left, so they say to the bramble, hey, bramble, this is a weed. Hey, you worthless weed that we burn to get rid of, you come and reign over us. In verse 15, the bramble says to the trees, if in good faith you are anointing me king over you, then come and take refuge in my shade. He has no shade to offer a tree. The weed, what shade does a weed have to offer a tree? And so he says, come and take refuge. What does this mean? How do you understand this? What he says, if in good faith you are anointing me king. And I say that because that comes up 2 more times. And you kind of get the idea that this might be the point. In verse 16, Jotham says, if you acted in good faith and integrity when you made Abimelech king, if you have dealt well with Jerubbaal and his house and have done to him the deeds that he deserved, for my father fought for you and risked his life and delivered for you to the hand of Midian, and you've risen up against my father's house this day and killed his sons, 70 men on one stone, and have made Abimelech, the son of his female servant, king over the leaders of Shechem, because he is your relative. If then you have acted in good faith, that's the 3rd time that we've seen that now. If you've acted in good faith and integrity with Jerubbaal and with his house this day, then rejoice in Abimelech. All my blessings to you, if you've acted in good faith. What is he saying? What does it mean? What's the message here? Yeah, Jonathan?
Maybe that they don't really want somebody like Abimelech necessarily. They just want somebody to reign over them. Maybe.
How about this? You got a guess you want to?
I'm going to take a stab at it. He says, look, you've done this in good faith, then everything's going to turn out great. But you and I both know you didn't do this in good faith. So guess what's about to happen to you?
Yeah.
You've messed with God, and you've messed with his anointed leaders.
Yeah.
It's not going to be good.
So good faith. I did a little word search on good faith, and this is the way that this word comes through in the English Standard Version. This word is often treated, about half the time, it's treated as faith or faithful or faithfully. If you have acted faithfully, that kind of would work. I think that would work. I think this one is a big piece of this. True and truthful. If you are being true, if this is true and truthful and faithful, the thing that you're doing, then all my best. But if this is an act of unfaithfulness, if this is an act of deceit or disloyalty, which is our theme, I think what we need to do, since disloyalty is the theme of this section, I think we need to kind of land in this neighborhood of true, faithful. If you have not acted faithfully in what you've done, then he says the same thing that Abimelech said, then you're going to get burned. Like he actually said burn with fire. Anything you want to say about that one and the fable and the point? All right, let's keep rolling then. 9:22 through 24. This seems to be a major interpretive key. These three verses are really kind of opening a window into what's going on here. Somebody, would you read 22 to 24, please?
Abimelech ruled over Israel 3 years, and God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the leaders of Shechem. The leaders of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech, that the violence done in the 70 sons of Jerubbaal bull might come, and their blood be laid on Abimelech their brother, who killed them, and on the men of Shechem, who strengthened his hands to kill his brothers.
Okay. Would you do 25 also, please?
And the leaders of Shechem put men to ambush against him on the mountaintops, and they robbed all who passed by along the way, and it was told to Abimelech.
Yeah. So God is responsible for what's coming. And he does it, it says, by sending an evil spirit. When I read that God sent an evil spirit, I'm thinking of some of the other places in the Bible where the thing that is in my head is God says to a spirit, hey, you, go down there and do this thing to accomplish my will. I don't think that's the way that we're supposed to understand this. God sent an evil spirit between these leaders of Shechem and Abimelech. I think it's like this. There is an evil spirit between me and Mark. Bad blood is the point. And so you'll see it. I think it's, let's see, I wrote this down. I got to find it. The New King James Version says, God sent a spirit of ill will between Abimelech and the men of Shechem. Or the NIV says this, God stirred up animosity between Abimelech and the citizens of Shechem. And so, how? I don't know. I'm really interested in hearing from some of you people who have lived a little bit of life and probably have seen this sort of thing. I'd love to hear your take on this. This is a story about disloyalty to God and disloyalty to Gideon and to Gideon's family. And an entire city rises up against another family and kills the 70 sons. And so here are Abimelech and Shechem doing this terrible thing. And what does God do to fix the problem? He's going to create disloyalty here. So the same disloyalty that created this trouble in the first place, God says, oh, that's what we're doing? Okay. And he fixes the problem in this way.
I agree that there's just disloyalty here. When I see the story at the beginning of chapter 9, it looks like Abimelech is trying to use loyalty to get the people to do what he wants them to do. Because he is from Shechem, not like his 70 brothers. He's the one that they should put their trust in because he's just like them. So they have this loyalty towards me. And then he tries to sow this loyalty throughout the chapter with the people. And 3 years of this, they're starting to see through a lot of this. They can tell that there is no common bond between them. It's not a loyalty that Abimelech shares with them. And he's been taking advantage of them. And I think they feel that. And that's this bad blood that we read about. And then there's this contention between them.
So that's I don't know how I would fix my slide. I think you're right. It's the main evil in this story is a disloyalty against God, but the evil happens based upon a perverted loyalty between family in the way that should not have happened. That's a good point. I don't know what to do with it, but I think I like what you're doing there. Other thoughts about this, Becky?
I think it's not surprising that someone who was so disloyal to his own family is also going to end up having other loyalty issues with other people. Like, it's just like if you have somebody who is a liar they're probably going to lie to you at some point. Or if they gossip to you about other people, they're probably going to gossip about you. So his character is just becoming known to these people.
Yeah. People who have been disloyal and evil to others will not hesitate to be disloyal and evil to each other, if that's their nature. Other thoughts or comments about this? So you see the disloyalty in verse 26. Make sure that you see I say beauty because it's just so, the story is, it's almost comedy. But make sure that you see it. It's not beauty, it's gross. But the exact same thing that Abimelech did to create this mess happens to him. Look at verse 26. Gaal, the son of Ebed, moved into Shechem with his relatives, and the leaders of Shechem put confidence in him. And they went out into the field and gathered the grapes from their vineyards and trod them under the festivals. And they went into the house of their God. So disloyalty to God still. They ate and they drank and they reviled Abimelech. And so here's Gaal running his mouth. Who is Abimelech? And who are we of Shechem that we should serve him? Is he not the son of Jerubbaal? He's doing the exact same thing that Abimelech did. Isn't that, I don't know what to say about it, but it's just. It's justice. And so now there's more sneaking around, just like there was before in verse 30. When Zebul, the ruler of the city, heard the words of Gaal, the son of Ebed, his anger was kindled, and he sent messengers to Abimelech secretly, saying, Behold, Gaal is coming. And so Abimelech, I keep saying Gideon, sorry about that. Abimelech shows up with his warriors, and verse 40, Abimelech chased him. He fled before him. Many fell wounded up to the entrance of the gate. Abimelech lived at Arunah, and Zebul drove out Gaal and his relatives, so they could not dwell in Shechem. On the following day, the people went out into the field. And Abimelech was told, and he told his people and divided them into 3 companies and set an ambush in the field. And he looked and he saw the people coming out of the city, so he rose against them and killed them. And Abimelech and the company that was with him rushed forward and stood at the entrance of the gate of the city. Well, hey, I got to just remind you, these are Israelites. This is not us fighting against the people of the land. This is us doing this with each other in this part of the story. Verse 46, when all the leaders of the tower of Shechem heard of it, remember, this is the place where the money came to support this crime in the first place. They entered the stronghold of the house of the God of the covenant. That's El Berit, the God of the covenant. And Abimelech was told, isn't that something that they go to the very place where they funded this project in the first place? Abimelech was told, all the leaders went to the tower of Shechem. He gathered together, and Abimelech went up to the Mount Zalmon. He and all the people who were with him. And Abimelech took an axe in his hand and cut down a bundle of brushwork. And he took it up and laid it on his shoulder. And he said to the men who were with him, what you have seen me do, hurry and do as I have. That's what Gideon said with the lamps and the pots. He said, hey, see the thing that I'm doing? You do it too. Abimelech learned this from his dad. So every one of the people cut down his bundle following Abimelech, put against the stronghold. They set the stronghold on fire over them, and all the people of the tower in Shechem also died, about 1,000 men and women. So these people who conspired together to be disloyal against God and God's family, Gideon's family, have now fought with each other. And Gideon destroyed the people of Shechem.
Cut down a bunch of brambles and set it on fire.
Oh, yeah. If you did this in good faith, then the very best to you. Otherwise, careful or you're going to get burned. So Gideon liked the idea so much of burning people in towers. In verse 50, Abimelech went to Thebez and encamped against Thebez and captured it, and there was a strong tower within the city, and all the men and the women and the leaders of the city fled to it and shut themselves in, and they went to roof of the tower. And Abimelech came to the tower and fought against it and drew near to the door of the tower to burn it with fire. And a certain woman threw an upper millstone on Abimelech's head and crushed his skull. Jael is the hero of the story who kills the enemy. Only the enemy is within God's family. This is the sad. I mean, it's sad to see this. He called quickly to the young man, the armor bearer, and said, "Draw your sword and kill me, lest they say a woman killed me." And so you see the end, verse 56. Here's the interpretation of the whole piece. Thus God returned the evil of Abimelech, which he committed against his father in killing 70 brothers, and God also made all the evil of the men of Shechem return on their heads, and upon them came the curse of Jotham, the son of Jerubbaal. Okay. Your points. We've got just like 1 minute left. Let's call it a couple minutes. Be optimistic. What's your takeaways? What are we leaving this class with? Remember, Judges is a downward spiral? We are down in the spiral. What are we going to learn?
Be loyal and don't get burned.
Yeah. Family loyalty matters. I think it was Jesus who said this, not Abraham Lincoln, that a house divided against itself can't stand. And here is Israel fighting against Israel. I want to go to Philippians 1, and I will leave you with this, and you can make your last point if you want to make the point before I read this or after I read this. That's fine. But I would like for us to say, at least as a home, mom, dad, kids, or as a church family, as we are here today, disloyalty and stabbing each other in the back only leads to destruction. There is no good end to us bickering and doing this family thing. So Philippians 1:27, let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or am absent, I may hear that you are standing firm in one spirit, with one mind, striving side by side for the faith of the gospel, not frightened in anything by your opponents. Our opponents are not each other. It's a clear sign to them of their destruction that we're standing together. But to us, it's a sign of our salvation, and that from God. For it has been granted to you that for the sake of Christ you should not only believe in him, but also suffer for his sake, engage in the same conflict that you saw and had and now hear that I still have. So if there is any encouragement in Christ, is there? Yes. Is there any comfort from love? Yes, there is. Participation in the Spirit, affection, sympathy. Complete my joy by being of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord and of one mind. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, Abimelech, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to your own interest, but also to the interest of others. And we do that because we model ourselves after Christ, who was not a king that snuck around and said, hey, put me on the throne. He said, I'll die for you. That's got to be our model. You want the last word? Michael?
Going through these judges, side points, not related to what I was here thinking of. With the downfall of men, we also see the importance of a godly woman and the power and the strength of a godly woman behind it all. You know, these men are all out being stupid and women are like, you wouldn't know, we're done with this. I'm going to put a stake through your head and drop a rock on you. Or they're going to kill Samson. Like,
That's right.
push comes to shove, a good, strong woman can correct things.
Yeah. We've seen it with Aksa, Deborah, Jael, now this unnamed woman. That's an excellent point. Good way to finish. Thank you all for your participation tonight.